November 30th episode of the Iamblichus reading group, we encounter divine and demonic entities. Welcome to Book 2 of the Egyptian Mysteries. This is the wonderfully amazing world of theurgic invocation and rite. Is Iamblichus describing beings he himself has witnessed, or are these the imaginings of a philosophical fantasist? We meet the strange figures of the cosmic and hylic archons. Does Theurgy follow the Gnostic teachings about these powerful beings, or is Theurgy teaching something entirely different? Join us as Farjana, Ryan, and myself describe our own encounters with the otherworldly. It's an exciting discussion. I hope you think so too. Hello everyone, thanks for joining the November 30th installment of the Iamblichus reading group. We're joined today with Farjana and Ryan, and I've begun these sessions with some preliminary remarks, so I'll just make a few, and then we'll go ahead and have Farjana and Ryan as well provide any preliminary remarks that they would like. So we're started book 2 of the Egyptian Mysteries with the Iamblichus, and in this book he starts describing the gods and related entities which theurgic practice evokes in its rituals. From manifestations to immensity to visions to intensity of light, Iamblichus introduces us to the supernatural world of otherworldly realities. These are descriptions provided in response to Porphyry's sharp-pointed skepticism about the efficacy and even need for theurgic rites. Iamblichus has so far given Porphyry enough philosophical answers to his questions about theurgy that he might begin to be somehow mollified. However, now Iamblichus turns to what I would call a phenomenological description of the entities that Theurgy supposedly gives access to in its rites and practices. Iamblichus has said all along that Theurgy has a special role. Now we see that this role is to actually produce, is there a better word for it? The divine phenomena that he has only so far spoken about abstractly. Now we are literally thrown into the crucible of theurgic activity as Iamblichus goes down the ontological scale of gods to the human soul. He gauges them in various forms of sensible effect. Depending on the ontological status of the entity, the difference their impact on the human soul is, though in strict terms this is the pneumatic vehicle, which we can certainly begin to discuss along with what we've been talking about previously. But Iamblichus is still speaking in the context of philosophical and debate and discussion here. He's not thinking that what he describes is potentially a scale for determining what and how these entities impact us as human soul. He is providing something which enables us, were we to attempt to invoke these entities, to determine between the various phenomena that we experience with them. This might seem strange, since you might think that a certain rite would produce a certain entity, but it seems that there is enough uncertainty in the practices that we need a scale like the one that Iamblichus provides to us. And as a side note, the Chaldean oracles, for example, and the Chaldean oracles were a basic text for Iamblichus and other theurgists. They do say that daemons sometimes can masquerade as gods. So you can see where Iamblichus is being very secure here, or wanting to be very secure and wanting to be sure that what we are dealing with are the entities that say that they are entities. In fact, the one comment that we saw last time was that they do say who they really are, whereas the daemons can lie. one thing to note is that these are supposedly based on experience, right? I mean, is Iamblichus telling us what he's experienced himself? Or is he describing the beings in terms of how the philosophy says they should manifest themselves? That is, the philosophy says, well, you have a higher being in a higher reality, so they should manifest themselves in this way. Whereas I'm thinking that it's really Iamblichus who is saying what he has seen in his own experience, and he's going from that. I think that's an interesting question we can perhaps look at. My own thought is that these are based on Iamblichus's experience, and so that with that in mind, I'd like to open the discussion to our own experiences with entities like these. And I'll go ahead. Anybody else want to open with any comments?
I was reading through this part where he kind of talks about the different types of entities, and he's very vague when he gives any kind of description. So it's not clear, but it does seem like it's the difference of densities. Like he'll talk about the mixtures and the light and like the different types. So it wasn't too clear for me, and it makes it difficult to discern, for my own self. But I do think it was in his experience. He saw them, he witnessed it, he saw, and he knows. And I think that's why he was able to write about it, because it was very, very clear for him. And I did look into it a little bit, and I came across the archons and the demiurge, which caught my attention. And it was David Icke's work where he talks about the archons, where there's ancient texts that were found. They were written by the Gnostics and in Nag Hammadi, and I think this was 400 BC. I think that's what he said, but it was probably written a long while like before that. So he talks about the archons being the rulers, and it was the archons that made a copy of the heavens, and that's how Earth came to be. So it was the rulers who had this power and ability to do that. And then what happened was they were able to entice somehow consciousness on the higher planes and trick them. And that's how we came down the hierarchy into the human body. And that seemed to kind of fit Iamblichus's model and what
That's
he's talking about.
Interesting point, because it is of a pretty contentious issue about what it is which archons Iamblichus is talking about, and is it the same as the Gnostic archons, or is it something different? He does talk about two different types of archons. He talks about cosmic and earthly archons. Just a note of historical note that Iamblichus was not too keen on the Gnostics. Plotinus, for example, was famous for kicking some Gnostics out of his discussion group because he didn't agree with their thoughts, and he thought that the Gnostics were downgrading creation and materiality so much that it was almost blasphemous. And I'm just wondering whether Iamblichus wouldn't have felt that way too. He doesn't. One of the big things about Iamblichus is that, contrary to Plotinus, who also somehow seems to degrade the created world, Iamblichus was actually doing something really unique within the theological and philosophical tradition that he was working in, which was to, in some way, raise up the material realm so that it did not become so degraded that one should not take consideration of it, or somehow consider it worthy of working with, or worthy of being, representative of who we are as a human being. It should be taken into consideration as comprising something of who we are in our real selves.
And that's why, it wasn't too clear to me, because, it sounded like if they were so high up in the hierarchy and they had so much power, then it sounds like they enslaved the consciousness into being trapped in the body. And that doesn't sound like a great thing. I mean, if they're such higher beings and, they are like the demiurge and they're meant to be higher up in the hierarchy in terms of the gods, then, it kind of makes me feel like, well, I don't really want to get in contact with that.
Not at all, right?
Yeah, it doesn't sound very good. But they have great power. So that's interesting. So
I think he sees that there is this demonic realm. Whether they're actually presided over by archons or whatever, I'm not sure Iamblichus would buy into that. But, the daemons themselves definitely do seduce one from seeing who, the true self, the true reality.
So does it mean, like, if you can access that level or those beings, then it's either or, depending on how you channel that power and use that power? Because there may be abusing power on that level, or maybe it can be used for good.
He definitely thinks it should be used for the good.
Yeah, I think of course he thinks that, but does it mean that it can be and it is abused? Because that's where I'm thinking, if the higher we go up the hierarchy, it seems like the more power that is available. So does that mean that they have a choice as well as we have a choice? And maybe beyond that are the beings of the higher gods, which, they can't, they're only for good. So that's where I was a little bit kind of,
Well, you notice that he does say that there are two types. So there's the cosmic, which seems to be a good type of entity, and then there's the hylic or the earthly, and they seem to be the worst type of archon, because they're dragging you down into the worst aspects of materiality.
Right? He did say that they were.
I mean, there are positive aspects to the material world, as well as negative aspects. And
then why are they called the same name then? If there's these two distinct aspects, like there's the cosmic one, so wouldn't they get another name? And then if there is the worldly one, then wouldn't they get a kind of a different kind of higher level on the hierarchy and have a different name? So that's where I was just a bit caught up.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say to that point, I've got a few things, but to that point, Farzana, just about the names themselves. I'm sure you might know this, you might not, but archon actually, like, epistemologically, is just the Greek word for ruler. So like in like the Hellenistic period, a lot of city-states had archons, rather than, like a king or anything like that. And I think even to, like, you talk about, or you hear about, like, Hadrian, I believe, was made the archon an archon in Athens, during his reign. So, like, I think that part of that is just that kind of, like, ruler epistemology. You know what I mean? Like, instead of an archon being a thing in and of itself, the way I interpret it is he's referring to just the ruler of that plane. So that's the way I interpreted it anyway.
Yeah, but, that would make a bit more sense. But it's just like when because he's talking about otherworldly and other realms, like these other realms, and then he talks about these two. If they're from the cosmic, then they're like this, and if they're from the worldly, then they're like this. So that's where I was a little bit not too clear.
You notice that they're lower than the angels and the archangels.
Right.
Right.
So, we can communicate with the angels and the archangels as well. And I get, that word arc, just on archon, it's so arche. It means basically beginning, like archetype, it would mean the original type, archetype is another word that it's based on. So kind of but it does refer to the type of governing aspect that Ryan is pointing out as well. But but they're very distinct. With the way the Gnostics are thinking of archons and the way that Iamblichus is thinking of archon is very distinct, and I think that they're really distinct and they're very different, and Iamblichus is not thinking in terms of the Gnostic type of archon.
Right.
I'm sorry, Ryan, I cut you off.
Oh, that's okay. Just back to like your original question of kind of like what is the framework of these chapters? Do you think that it's like philosophically underpinned, or is it more experiential in Iamblichus's case? And I have a question for you guys on this one, because in my reading, it is like, I would say honestly, this is one of the weakest sections I have read personally. It's very much evocative, and like it makes you, it paints a very cool picture, but I don't see the same sort of like philosophical underpinning that we have for the first book of the work. And I was just wondering if you guys thought the same, if you have any like, different interpretations of that.
Well,
because
the
thing that I was thinking the whole time was that this feels like Pokemon. Like I didn't have the best reaction to these chapters.
Yeah, I mean that's why I thought it was quite vague. Like that's the word I can use, because that's how it felt to me. But at the same time, I do feel like he saw this with his own inner eye and in his experience. And I think that's how he's able to talk about it. Yeah. But it was very vague.
Yeah, I think he's definitely gone beyond philosophy here. This is more descriptive and phenomenological, which is a term I used. And I think he's talking about something which is coming from experience, and just as far as being vague, I think these things are very difficult to talk about and to describe. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I don't know whether this is the way it was or not, but maybe it's just. Oh yeah, don't we all?
Yeah, like, well, where's all the pictures?
But that's where you're supposed to. But that's where the personal experience comes in, right?
I know.
I mean, he's saying that this is personal experience, and it's so difficult to describe that perhaps he's bumping up against his abilities or his linguistic abilities to describe something so earth-shattering. Because some of the if they are experiences, some of the experiences that he must have had would be pretty powerful, and would probably shake the foundations of your being if you were ever to encounter them. But that's just me. Yeah. Matt, you've joined us again. How you doing? You're on mute, Matt. If you're maybe just. So Ryan, does that go some way towards your?
Yeah. So
does that help in any way about as far as the philosophical versus the non-philosophical?
Well, I mean, like in all honesty, that was just more of an observation than anything else. I think that like experiential conversations, they're important when we're talking about any sort of contact with outside entities or anything like that, any sort of like spiritualized conversation. I think experience is a key part of that, that actually kind of transcends the philosophy. What I noticed was it felt like a distinct change in the writing itself. And I also do like recognize that, you know, it's the start of a new book, and perhaps there's just an element of like setting the stage prior to, you know, getting into the meat of it. But there's actually one.
Just the thing about the book, unfortunately or fortunately, he didn't break up his work in like books or chapters. That was Marsilio Ficino during the Renaissance. So in some ways, the way that it's broken up into books is, you know, purely by chance. It's arbitrary almost. Although Ficino, of course, was a great thinker and so on.
Right.
But I actually saw I was actually seeing kind of the transition in some ways as it is a little bit abrupt, but then I also started to see where the arbitrariness of the breaking it up into books and stuff didn't work, because the first section and the second section, you know, at least the way that it's broken up, and I can see where Ficino would break it up in this way, are distinct different and different in probably the way that you're recognizing.
Well, getting more into like the actual experiential side of it, there's one kind of like paragraph line that really stood out to me in terms of actual similarities with my own experiences. And that was on page 95, when he's talking about the archangels, I believe. Archangels. Yeah. And he says, moreover, the fire that the gods is wholly stable when beheld, that the archangel has a degree of stability, but that of the angels is permanently set in motion. That of the daemons is unstable, and the heroes has still more unstable movement. Stillness is a characteristic of primary archons, but turmoil of the lowest. That the soul changes according with multiple movements. And putting that into context with my own experiences, as I've kind of like talked about before, any of my experiences with what I would classify as like the higher, the above, I think that idea of stillness is really important. Like, I think a lot of times it's described as peace, as like elation, as a sort of feeling of enlightenment, right? But I think that it's very grounded in the moment. There's like a feeling of, I think, stability. That's another word that he uses, that exists when you're dealing with that sort of stuff. Now, when I've dealt with what I would probably classify as the lower, there's always, and I would say this is one of the characteristic elements of those experiences for me, a sense of extremely rapid and chaotic movement. It's so hard to put into words, but like closing your eyes and feeling and seeing that movement kind of like swirl around you in a way that doesn't really make sense. Like, you can't really comprehend what's going on. The like overwhelming sense is speed and movement and chaos. And so that really spoke to me, that paragraph, because I was like, oh, that is exactly what I've experienced. So I was wondering if you guys have any similar experiences. Yeah? Okay.
100%. Like, you know, it's the turbulence, you know, the other way, and it's like extreme, like, as you say, chaotic. It's very quick, fast, that kind of a sensation or experience, whereas the higher beings are extremely light, and there is a tranquility in that, an ease, like a gentle breeze. So that's definitely been within my experience too.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Because that like I always say when I'm dealing with something that's perhaps on like the lower plane, I always say it feels like you're in a storm, and you're kind of like being whipped around, because it has this like, I think chaos is the best way to describe it. And Matt, I saw your comment there about the platonic ideal of like the one as undivided, unchanging. And that actually makes a whole lot of sense to me when like putting it in more philosophic, like well-constructed terms. You know what I mean? That when the nature of the unchanging, of the eternal, like that temporality and that movement doesn't make a lot of sense when you put it in those frameworks.
Yeah, I think that's like where the idea of the eye of the storm or the eye of the tornado comes from.
Yeah.
Stillness point. And that's, it comes up everywhere. Stillness, to be still. You're pretty much all meditation practices are based on that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's
difficult to do because it's thoughts are always moving. There is emotion to thoughts. There is motion, rapid motion in emotions, and it's very hard to kind of settle the mind and tame that down, and then go through the emotions and kind of make sure that they come to a standstill, and then you go beyond that. Very difficult to do in practice.
Well, I mean, think about it. Like when you're very emotional about something, when you have like when you've got that sort of fire under your belly, your heart beats quick. You start to sweat. There's like physical changes that, in my mind, all sort of relate to that idea of movement and of. I always use the term like unbridled movement. Just like movement without a cause. Not a cause. Movement without a logic, I guess, is the best word.
And that's
at least that I can see. Yeah.
But I think for some of us, it requires a lot of practice to practice the grounded aspect of it, and to accumulate the stillness and the ability to do that. It's very hard to do, but I found anyway, in practice, because the mind always wanders. Very difficult to restrict.
This is what this is great. I think that this is where we need to go as far as describing our own experiences in relationship to what Iamblichus is describing, because it shows that what he's talking about is not just made up stuff, right? That these are real entities that have reality, and that it's what I'm hearing though is, how do we get in contact with them? I'm also hearing kind of the stillness of our mind is somehow going to invoke a reality which is also very still. However, what then do we talk about, like in Ryan, your experience? What is invoking these other entities, these daemons, that are less still and that are more chaotic?
Well, I mean, for me, sometimes that has been a result of conscious effort, trying to get in contact with the, I guess, lower entity. But I think that what Farzana said about the fact that these things take like a great deal of practice and attuning, I suppose, would be a good word for it, in order to like effectively complete work with the one, with the above. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times that like the more chaotic elements for me have come as a result of a more unstable worldview, a more like unstable self, really. As I've said before, and like as Farzan has said, like I think that like we are in contact with these things often and regularly, regardless of whether we like see it that way or are really trying to do that. I think that that is just how reality exists. And you've heard me talk a ton of times about symbols and, you know, that like as above, so below paradigm. And I think that it's just like yet another example of that same paradigm happening. When your soul is chaotic, when you are existing in that realm, and that's the reflection that you put into the above, right? Like to me, it stands to reason that that is what you would attract. That's what's going to be coming down to interact with you. So when I say things like, you know, purification is a constant effort, and like theurgy is lived, it's not acted, that has a lot to do with it. You know, like how are you living, and how is that impacting what you are bringing in? And are you living with that in mind? You know, like, yeah.
These are kind of the preliminaries, I think, that Iamblichus takes for granted, is that we are living a life. We are living a life which is in preparation for then something else that goes along with our life, which are these rituals and these rites, and whether we think of them, and I think this is a question that we'll want to get to, whether we think of them as meditation or contemplation or literal rites of some kind. And actually, this is something I want to present on during our next session. But what are the rituals that are necessary to invoke these entities and these beings? I think Matt has, I'm looking at his comment, as he's talking about the purification in Solomonic magic. You're supposed to connect to the stillness of God to give you authority over the demons. Ryan would probably be able to speak to the Solomonic stuff more specifically than me. I mean, both of you, do you have rituals that you do in order to invoke the entities, or is it something which is part of contemplation? In my own case, I can see where the meditational part, I have a certain ritual that I go through, which is to invoke the entity of Hecate. And during that, I also have a meditational component, which I would consider to be similar to imagination and encountering entities which are somehow blocking my way to have a way of mind or a way of thinking, which is blocking me then to have the full manifestation of the goddess Hecate appear. And I think that the Chaldeans, the way that the Chaldeans talk about the rituals, they talk about the demons are there trying to keep you from reaching the higher levels. So you actually have to implement some type of safeguards into your ritual, which will block the demons from impeding your ascent, your purification ascent. Is that something that you're both experiencing?
Yeah, it seems like the more that I've tried to ascend, the more that they come to try and block me. I find that it's when I tend to get off track, when I get more in contact with the chaotic kind of energies, and just instability in general, when I feel like I'm thrown off track or I've become more unstable, and then I have to kind of recalibrate to come back into my center and my stillness and my midpoint. is the way that I would describe it.
Now, is this a
And
meditational practice you're performing, or?
I think it's more becoming more conscious of the fact that I've been taken off track, because sometimes that can happen and we're just completely unaware of it, and it manifests as anxiety. I'd say that's one of the reasons that we experience anxiety, is a way of telling us, look, you're kind of going off track, so you need to bring yourself back. So it tends to be more a conscious awareness of when I'm kind of going off track. One way that I've been able to kind of, I don't know if you'd call it strengthening my center or keeping it at the forefront anyway, is something that occurred to me when I was, because I do a lot of research and I look into these things and mysticism quite a lot, and it was about the vibrational frequency of love, true love, like not the Hollywood love, but the real reality, which is true love. To keep to that kind of vibrational frequency is very difficult, but it tends to be at the center of our being, deep inside of our core. The kingdom of heaven is within you. That's the quote of Jesus in the Bible. And to access it, first of all, but also to keep it at the forefront is what I found the most difficult, because there's always distractions. And what was really interesting is that I was listening to something, and then they were talking about the 5 to 8 hertz, the frequency on the electromagnetic spectrum, and 5 to 8 is right in the middle, which is the green frequency. And that's why a lot of nature is green, because God is literally playing his harmonic of love to his creation. We're just kept away from that, or distracted so much from it, that it's difficult for us to recalibrate and reattune back into it. And in the Pythagorean number sequence, like, I never knew this, but it only goes up to number 9, and 0 is a carrier. So it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 0 is a carrier. And then if there's a double number, then they would add it to come to a single digit, because it always comes back to 9. And the frequency of love is 5 to 8. If you add them together, that's 15. If you add 1 and 5, it's 6. So it's right bang in the middle of the sequence of creation of this vibrational frequency. And in the Bible and in the Quran, God says that he created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. So then when I contemplated that, there is in the Quran where God says that he created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. And where that's embedded in the Quran is in the first 6 chapters of the Quran, up until you get up to chapter number 7 and 8. So within that, before that, when you're doing the recitation, it's almost as if you're rebuilding that structure of your core, or my core. And therefore, I can keep that at the forefront, and I can resonate with that. And that's easier for me to keep in touch with that. Because when I recite those verses or those chapters, because they have to be read in sequence and they have to be read each day according to the lunar calendar. So day 1 of the lunar calendar, you'd read chapter 1, which is called Surah Baqarah. And then day 2 of the lunar calendar, you'd recite chapter 2, and then chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So once you recited all of those 6 chapters, it's almost as if it keeps that love frequency at the forefront. And I have had that within my own experience. So for me, it's a ritual practice, and it is done through vibrational frequency, and it is done with our holy book.
Well, thanks for that, Farzana. That's awesome. I love to like actually get into the nuts and bolts of like how other people practice. Because that's something that we don't often talk about. Yeah.
So it always helps me when I hear like, oh, so how did you do it? Like, what do you do? Because I want to know how to do that. So that's why it's very important, I think, for us to share our experiences. Because if we can keep ourselves to that frequency, then I think that's the point. And keep coming back to that.
Yeah, and I'm like,
so your ritual's more geared towards recitation and meditation.
Yeah, so it's the vibrational frequency. So for me, that
when you say vibrational frequency, you mean what do you mean?
It's like the creation of a frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Like that will emit a certain harmonic. Like we know it, like
right. But how do you create the? Sure. How do you create?
I can maybe speak to that if you want, Farzana, because I'm like on a very similar sort of wavelength, maybe a similar vibrational frequency.
So I would just answer Chaz quickly. It's just that with the Quran, the mystery of the Quran is within the letters. So then the letters themselves and the combination of the letters by virtue produces that frequency. So that's why I talk about it in that context.
This is interesting. There's a Abraham Abu Alafia, who's was a Jewish Kabbalist. Has done similar types of vocalizations and used a type of meditational technique like that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So that's how I.
And also, I know the Sufis as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So then they would do it in particular with God's divine names. Now, I do find that to be effective, but it's like when I understood the first chapters of the Quran, that for me really gave me an insight into why were these 6 days so important? Because God created the heavens, like that realm, and then what it is within our tradition is that God created the heavens and the earth with the Arabic letters. That's one perspective of it, right? So for me, that's how I bring it into my existence. So that to make it clear to Chaz, so I just
the Jewish Kabbalists have that as well, right?
They have that too, yeah, they do, yeah.
With the letters, the Hebrew letters as well.
Yeah, the sacred. Yeah.
I mean, I think the Greeks did too. No.
The Greeks did. I think
not the letters per se.
No, I think it is as well. I think there is. I think the Greek letters are sacred as well, and they had a similar.
Well, they have numerical value, and there was certainly a numerology associated with that, but as far as something similar to the actual creation of reality using language,
but that's what it is.
Not necessarily the letters.
Right. Maybe it was a little bit different, but a lot of the sacred texts pretty much had that embedded in there. So that's how I found it to be effective for me.
So for me, like I said, very kind of similar framework, just operationally a little bit different. I never really use like the term in my sort of like own self-perception vibrational frequency, but I think that it it reflects what I'm talking about quite well. So I'm just going to continue to use the term. And when you ask Chaz, like for me, if it's more meditative or more ritual, I'd say, well, I'm very much on the same footing as Matt in his comment, that it's both. you know? And I know that that's like a cop-out answer, but let me explain. When it comes to the meditative, and again, like this is something I would characterize as being just sort of about a large scale, well thought out journey, right, of ascension. So every day I'm trying to put myself in that vibrational frequency, if you will. That usually starts with like a morning meditation and an evening meditation. And again, when we talk about the idea of stillness, that is the framework that I'm usually trying to operate when I am doing these sort of like regular meditative, everyday sort of practices. It's about making myself and my soul and my body all kind of interact well with one another and keep them at the same vibration. It's like not like a huge thing for me. Usually it's just like a 15 minute like sort of like mindfulness meditation. It's very simple, you know? And I think that usually is the thing that gets me into the best place to, like I say, have these more like revelatory experiences that often come about through what I would call the theurgy of life, you know, just the way that you live and how that interacts with the above. Now, when I do specific rituals, generally this is because I would like a specific thing to happen. There's a couple different ways I go about it, but like primarily the key functionalities are the same as the day-to-day practice. So like whenever I start a ritual, I start with the purification. And for me, again, like this is kind of ripping off the ancient Greeks a little bit, kind of ripping off like Chaldean oracle, like Hermetica type stuff. And it's a recitation of just the vowels in sort of like a rhythmic chant sort of way, just I-yo, over and over again until I deem myself to be purified. I think that like by doing these sort of meditative chants, it is a good thing to do because it focuses our attention on a simple vibration, right? Like when I'm doing those, like I guess chants would be the right word. My whole mind is focused on that thing. And then when we get into like kind of more complex ritual stuff, like Matt brought up the idea of circles and like Solomonic magic or incense or trying to think of something else. Those are the big ones that I consistently use. Or herbs and stuff. The idea is that these things are reflections. They operate on the same vibrational frequency as whatever it is you're trying to get in contact with. So yeah, short answer is like it's both, but I think that it's really important to keep in mind what it is you're trying to do when you're doing ritual. Because, well, as I've said before, like I think that you can kind of get in trouble if you're like interacting with things in a way that's impure, and I think that I have experienced that quite a few times in my own life. But I really like the idea of trying to like match your own frequency. And I think that a lot of times that is what ritual is about. It's like, yeah, you can spend years in meditation and contemplation trying to get to the same place. But where ritual comes in to play for me is like it almost supercharges that process. It allows for that to happen in a much shorter time than would otherwise be the case. And that's why it's an effective tool. And it's all about bringing yourself into that, again, vibrational frequency. I usually use the term bringing yourself into that realm, you know, that realm of thought and that realm of being that allows you to interface with the above in specific ways.
Yeah, and yeah, that's really nice. And the reason that I say vibrational frequency, because it's a resonance. Like, I will only resonate with the higher beings if I am resonating to that frequency. So that's why I use the term vibrational frequency. Because when I'm unstable, feeling like I've gone off track, or, feeling quite turbulent, what do the signals look like? They look like quite erratic, energies coming off of me or whatever. What is that going to attract? Similar kind of things that are going to be in resonance with that. So I think the term vibrational frequency really kind of fits with me. It really sums it up in a really easy way. I feel.
Yeah, because I also think that it is something that's like based in material understandings. So like for us having been raised in a materialist culture, it's easy for us to like pick up on and understand.
I think you can, when they talk about spirits, right? I mean, now I would describe it as energies. I mean, it's quite a simple way. Instead of saying gods, a higher energy frequency. Yeah. That's easy for me to understand in modern day, terminology. So I don't think that it's so mystical anymore. It really can be normalized. We can have gods amongst us, like that.
Yeah. No, and I mean, like, whenever I'm talking with someone that's like not already into the occult or the esoteric or has like mystical experiences, I will always use the term energies rather than gods or daemons or angels or whatever, what have you, because I think it actually is good at, it's an actually like descriptive phrase to talk about the things we are talking about. And, people are just more likely to continue the conversation with you if you say energies rather than gods.
That's true. And ultimately, I think that's what they are. I mean, what else?
Yeah.
I mean, what else? Really
Exactly. It's like, it's just lame.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't sound so.
Yeah.
It's so mystical and wonderful, but technically, like, it's the same thing. But what you were saying about your everyday kind of living that, or like how we're living in our day to day. That's what I meant by the consciously seeing if I'm kind of moving off track and just bringing myself back, because it's a recognition.
And I see. I think that again. I think Iamblichus assumes that he assumes that you're living a good life, or that you're living a virtuous life. He talks about all the civic virtues, all the theurgic virtues, and so on. So those are prerequisite for what he's talking about, I believe. So
right.
living a theurgical life is of course very important, because the goal is to be purified so that you can indeed come into the presence of the higher realities, and the higher realities will in some way grace you with their presence. So, and my question though is, with the types of benefits that he describes for each entity, it seems to me that is saying that one invokes them in order to have these benefits bestowed upon me or us. So, does that seem right to you? That at least for Iamblichus, that there are certain rituals that we can perform which will and give us something in return? Where he talks about the health of the body, the health of the soul. All of these things can be gotten if we do invoke, and we know how to invoke the entity.
I mean, yeah, I'm definitely on board with that.
I
I
agree.
think that anyone that like practices magic in any way would be. And like I just back to like the actual, just real quick, back to the operations of ritual. Especially like if, I mean, maybe Farzana, this wouldn't be exactly your vibe, but like Chaz, if you're looking for a ritual that has been quite effective for me, one of the things that I've found to be most effective is actually the Mithraic initiation.
Mm-hmm. Which one?
Because the one in the book that I have.
The one in the book you have. Okay.
Yeah,
you have?
It's called Hermetic Magic by Edward Flowers, but I believe
okay.
it's PGM.
Right. Okay. That's the one I was going to. That's actually the one I was going to present on at our next meeting.
Oh, okay, sweet. Yeah, no, I work from this book a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and I just find that that's a very good one for getting me. It's long enough that it really gets me into the right headspace.
Sure.
And I think that it hits a lot of those like key elements within ritual that I find to be most effective. You know,
has it been modified in any way?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it has to be modernized in some way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like I have been known to change things up based on like how it is operating with me in the moment. Like sometimes I'm just like, nope, this isn't working for me. Like I need to either just quit and try again later, or, you know, it talks a lot about like fire and light is a key sort of element.
Now the goal of this is to rise into the of this rite is to rise into the higher realities and come into contact with the gods.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's a really good starting point ritual. You know, there's plenty you can do for like specific things, material outcomes, you know, but the Mithraic initiation is a little bit different because it's all about, well, initiating you, right? It's right in the name, like initiating you to the mysteries. I believe, from what I understand, it would have been sort of the capstone of a Mithraic initiate's induction into the orders.
I mean, if you want the scholarship on it, it's not Mithraic at all. Right. It actually goes back to Egyptian temple.
Right.
It was misidentified by the early German scholar who first published it as a Mithraic practice, but it has nothing to do with mythos at all.
Well, hey, the more you know. Like I say, I'm a whatever works.
I'm interested. No, exactly. I think that's an important idea that, you know, if it works, it works, right? That's and that is a, in some ways, that is a keystone of the way that the Egyptian priests practiced was, wait a minute, does this work? Oh, it doesn't work. Well, let's try something else. Let's tweak it here. Let's tweak it there.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's an important concept to keep in mind.
So again, like from what I was saying about, you know, the references to fire and to light, you know, if there's something, let me see if I can come up with any.
Well,
examples.
if you want to, can you send it to us and
yeah. I mean, it's in like a
I can post it on the blog.
It's in a book, but I'll have to scan it in. But I can definitely do that. But all I was going to say was,
what's the book? Sorry,
it's Hermetic Magic by Stephen Edred Flowers. But I'll scan it in the next couple of days and send it across just so we can all have a look.
Well, again, I was going to present on that at our next meeting. Oh, sorry, Farzana. I was going to go ahead and present on that for our.
That would be quite good. So, I mean, if you could scan it and then maybe we could all have a look, read through it, and then maybe go through it next, or you present it next.
Oh, there we go. I like that.
Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. It takes a long time, so I probably wouldn't actually like go through the entire ritual.
I can probably get it. I can probably get it for you if you tell me the
But
page numbers and stuff. I can.
yeah,
I can,
it's 173 through 182.
okay. All right. And then I will go ahead and scan the one in the PGM as well. PGM being
perfect,
the Papyri Greek magic, Greco Magica, Magicae.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the main source for Greek magic, and it's by many scholars it is believed that ritual and then another ritual, which has often been referred to as the Eighth Book of Moses, are probably theurgic rituals very close to what Iamblichus and the theurgists actually did. There's also one, you talk about initiation as well, Ryan, and there is an actual ritual, an initiation ritual, which Proclus, the theurgist Proclus, who is kind of the follower of Iamblichus, talks about. And it hasn't been identified in any text, but the outline of the ritual itself is very interesting because it involves, and I think we discussed this way back when we first started, it involves being buried up to your neck, and certain invocations and things also taking place while that is going on.
Cool.
And I can post that as well. So okay. I think this has been a very fruitful discussion. I thank you two for hanging in there. If you can hang on a little bit after the session, we can talk about some logistics. But for everyone who's been listening, thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll join us next time when the Iamblichus reading group meets. Thank you. Again, thank you for listening to the November 30th episode of the Iamblichus Reading Group. I'm traveling to New York again next week, so Ryan, Farjana, and I will be meeting in 2 weeks. Join us then as we discuss and look at the so-called Mithras liturgy. This is an old occult rite that has its roots in ancient Egyptian temple rituals. Join us as we discuss it and see how it relates to theurgic ritual and practice.